me today. I was telling Sarah that I'm a bit nervous about giving this presentation today because I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Hopefully there's some other people from the public here that can really benefit from this. But I've been a genealogist for 20 years, and then I started my archivist career in 2011. And so I'm very passionate about archives and about records preservation. The photograph there you see on the left with the arrow pointing to some gloved hands, those were my hands. This photo was taken at the Archives Institute in 2013. I'm actually working on some of the Tennessee Supreme Court records that we got the privilege to work on at the TSLA. And so I'm always and constantly teaching actually genealogists and family historians about preserving their records. I'm kind of considered an old-fashioned point of view on this. I think less is more. The less you do to your records, the better preserving them. So we're going to get started, and hopefully you'll enjoy this presentation. One of the things I like to point out to anyone who's doing records preservation, especially family historians and genealogists, is that they are a lot alike archivists. And so genealogists really are home archivists. If you think about the records, the photographs, the scrapbooks, the diaries, grandma's quilt, the family Bible, all of the things that genealogists gather during their research, and also family historians, if they don't necessarily research their family history, but they do collect family history. They also collect this ephemera and records and photographs. And so it's important that we, as archivists, I think, reach out and help these people to know how to preserve what they have at home. Of course, I am also encouraging always to donate to archives to allow us to digitize what they have, because a lot of times what they have at home is unique, one of a kind, something we don't have in our archives, and should be preserved as for history. So there are a lot of ways where genealogists are similar to archivists. And so genealogists are home archivists in that they collect old records, just like archivists do that work in archives every day. Maybe they have been given these records by their grandparents, their parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. When our loved ones pass, many times our attics, our basements are cleaned out, and these records have to go to somebody, or a lot of times they're thrown away, which I really hope that doesn't ever happen. So many of our genealogists and family historians have these records in their possession. And so they're always constantly, I'm getting constant emails, I'm sure that a lot of you as archivists do as well, about how to take care of these records. And so that's kind of why I put this presentation together. I give this presentation to a lot of historical and genealogical societies. And I am also sharing it with genealogists and helping them to take care of their records. Another way that genealogists are similar to archivists is that they have the ability to preserve their records, photographs, and artifacts for future generations to enjoy. That's what we do as archivists, and that's what I try to teach genealogists to do with what they have. Because if they take care of their records, they'll survive, and maybe one day they will be donated to one of our archives. And wouldn't it be nice for us to receive those records, and they're already in a preserved fashion? They're not in boxes, covered in soot or dirt, or just all the ways that we have seen these records come to our archives. So if we teach these genealogists how to take care of their records now, maybe that will even help us down the line. Another way that genealogists are similar to archivists is that they also like to share their information and records with other researchers, just like we as archivists do. October is American Archives Month, and so many of us are trying to share what is in our collections. One of the ways that I do that, and I've been doing it from the beginning since I started at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the Houston County, Tennessee Archives is that we never had an archives until 2011 when I was hired to be the archivist. A little bit of a story and background on that. I think every archives has a story. So our story is, there is a local lady here who was writing and researching her family history, and she had a grandfather that was shot and killed on the streets of Erin in 1921. So she was researching that story along with the rest of her family history, and she was putting together a book. She could see the actual court records about this murder at the library on microfilm, but many genealogists really want to see those actual records, and how many of us as archivists have had them walk into our archives wanting to see those records. So she was asking around, where are the records located? And so she was pointed to the basement of the county courthouse, to the records vault. Our county courthouse was built in 1956, and in the basement there is a wonderful records vault. It's a whole room. And so she went down there, and the door was unlocked for anyone to go in and do whatever they wanted to. She opened it, but she couldn't get in it. The records were actually piled to the ceiling and to the door. So she kind of put out a call to the historical community, asking for volunteers, because she had gotten permission from the county mayor to clean out the records vault and just organize it. That's all that was going to happen, was to clean it out and organize it. And so I got a phone call from our county librarian, Mrs. Kay French, and she asked me if I would like to be part of this group. And, you know, honestly, I almost said no, because I already had enough on my plate. How many of us know how that feels? And she kind of talked me into it, and I said, okay, you know, for one day I can go help. So it was in August of 2010. We started working on that vault, pulling out boxes. There were records spilled out on the floor. We found old Christmas ornaments in there. We found unspent ammunition, because the basement had been the fallout shelter, and I'm sure that it was used for many things like that. So there was unspent ammunition in there. We found everything. So we worked for half a day, went to lunch, and as we were sitting there were 6 of us. We were talking and decided we needed an archive. And so everybody agreed to that. Well, then someone made the comment that someone needed to head up this project. And of course, everybody sat on their hands. Nobody volunteered, and including myself, because like I said, I already had enough going. And someone said, well, Melissa, you need to do it because you do genealogy research. And I knew nothing about being an archivist. And so luckily and thankfully, the Tennessee State Library and Archives offers the Archives Institute program. And so I attended that. And I became our first county archivist. We were established in 1871, and absolutely nothing had been done with our records. So 10 years later, we're still going strong. But back to genealogists and archivists. So another thing that genealogists love, as well as archivists love, is that the stories that these records can tell. I don't know about you, but when I work in my archives every day, I'll run across a document, a photograph or something, and I have to stop and I've got to do a little research and find out the story. So we have some similarities. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about these things: a dedicated workspace. We're going to talk about original order. We're going to talk about a home archivist toolkit, and it's actually a toolkit. You're going to see that. We're going to talk about binders, folders, and boxes, unfolding and flattening records, cleaning records, removing hazards, records storage and climate controls, and then consulting with the conservator. So first, let's talk about a dedicated working space. This is something that I learned early on as an archivist, is having a dedicated working space. And so this is what I teach to genealogists, is that they need to have one of these at home, whether that is your dining room table, whether that is your guest bedroom's bed, because not all of us can live in an archive. I know that us as archivists, we feel like that we do, because we're at our archives all the time. But those out there that have these records in their homes, they don't live in an archives. And so they have to find their own spaces to do their work. So I encourage them to find a space that will work for them, and to always use that same space because you're comfortable there. And so one of the things that we do in our archives in Houston County is that when I have a volunteer like Miss Ann Sykes, who's pictured here, I give them a space to do their work, and that's their space. Because a lot of times, you know, they're working on projects that take more than one day, more than a week, and they need their space. And so having a dedicated working space, I find, is a wonderful thing to do and to have. Have your Archivist toolkit at the ready, and I'm going to show you exactly what we put in an Archivist toolkit in just a minute. But I always encourage genealogists to actually put together this kit and to have it at their space wherever they're working. I encourage people to work on one collection of records at a time. This is also a lesson I learned in archives, is that we need to work on one collection of records at a time. We don't always get to do that in an archive setting because there's so much that we do. But the reason I say this is because a lot of times records from one collection can get messed up in records of another collection, and we don't want that to happen. And so working on one collection of records from beginning to end also ensures that we keep the original order, that we keep all of those records with that collection together. and not mixed up in something else. Now, I know in archives, I will work on a particular collection one day and I'll move to another collection another day. But working from a genealogist standpoint, hopefully they can use the one collection of records at a time to their advantage. And this is something also that I actually do in the archives as much as possible. I don't do this every day, but I encourage genealogists to clean up their space at the end of the day. And it serves two purposes. I find that if you clean up your space at the end of the day, you may find a stray document or a stray photograph, one of those really, really tiny photographs, or something in the space that maybe you overlooked. And also the thing that helps me when I clean up my space at the end of the day is that the next day when I come in to work, I'm fine that I'm excited and ready to go to work if my space is cleaned up or at least tidy. And so, like I said, I don't do this every day, but I really do try to do it as much as possible. Original order. Those of us that are archivists already know about original order. The Society of American Archivists Glossary of Terms. If you've never been to the Society of American Archivists Glossary of Terms, I encourage you to use it. All you need to do is go to their website, put in the search bar glossary, and you'll find it. Any archival term you want to look up is in this glossary. And so I use it all the time. It's a fantastic resource. But original order is defined by the Society of American Archivists as a fundamental principle of archives. Maintaining records in original order serves two purposes. First, it preserves existing relationships and evidential significance that can be inferred from the context of the records. And second, it exploits the record creators' mechanisms to access the records, saving the archives the work of creating new access tools. And many of us as archivists knows that when we get donations of records and it's just thrown into a box, we know there's no original order. But there are records collections that we do get, and there are records collections that genealogists get from their family members that have some sort of an order. One of the things that I'd like to use an example is a scrapbook. Many times they don't have an original order, but if you look at it closely enough, a lot of times it's in chronological order. It's in simply the fact that they put things in as they live. If it's, newspaper articles or things that have happened in their lives. And so a scrapbook is a good example of original order. Our ancestors and people who donate to us for records may have a reason for how they put together a scrapbook or a photo album or a collection of records. And so we need to be respectful of that. And it'll also help us as we're processing records, as we are as genealogists and at home, putting together our own family archive. So paying attention to original order is actually very important. I have to tell you the story about this particular photograph. About 3 years ago, I had a couple of sisters walk into the archives and they were carrying two boxes that looked just like this. This is just a photo of one of them. And they proceeded to tell me that their mother was laying in the nursing home and they were cleaning out their mother's house. And they came across these binders and they were on their way to the dump to throw it away. And someone told them to come by the archives. That may be something I would be interested in. So I looked through the binders and I came to realize that these binders represented 50 years of their mother's genealogy research. And they had no interest in it. And as we all know, many times there are family members that just absolutely have no interest in stuff like this. The other thing I noticed was the fact that these surnames had nothing to do with Houston County, Tennessee. A lot of these surnames were from Pennsylvania and places up north. And so I had a decision to make. And I knew that if these boxes walked out of the archives, that they were going to get thrown away. And they had original documents in them, original photographs. And so I decided to keep them. I took them. And so over the last 3 years, I've been sharing what I have with genealogists and sharing the information with them. But I've also kind of been talking to some archives in the places where these surnames are about repatriating these records up there. So we don't always take things that don't belong in our archives, but in this case, I just could not see these getting thrown away. Boxes of records may have been packed a certain way for a reason. I tell you one thing, working for a county archive, we have turnover when it comes to elected officials. And as I was cleaning out our vault and cleaning out some of the record storage places, I found boxes where it looked like that someone had been newly elected and all they did was push everything off of the old person's desk and threw it in a box. So there was no original order, but many times there is an original order in boxes of records that we may get. Keeping our original order could help us tell our ancestors' story in sequence. And that's the case for archives as well. Our ancestors' story may have an original order to it when we receive these records, like I said, a scrapbook, a photo album. And so it's important that we pay attention to that original order. Some organizational methods. I get emails all the time from genealogists and those that have family records asking me about how to organize their family stuff. Many times they have a lot of it and they don't know where to begin or what to do. And so one thing I tell people is to choose a method that works well for you. There isn't one method that works for everybody. Don't think that you have to do a method that someone else is using, regardless if it works for you or not. And so find an organizational method that works well for you, but just be consistent in that organizational method throughout the work that you do. What works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for me. I can tell you in my own private genealogical records, I've actually switched methods over time. I've been doing genealogy research for 32 years, and I would say for the first half of that, I did a particular organizational method, and then the second half, I did something different. I switched because I found that as I learned more and as I understood more, I needed to change my method. So don't be afraid to change either. So whatever method you choose, just be consistent in using the method throughout organizing your records. It isn't very helpful to have 2 or 3 different kinds of methods throughout your research records. So try to find one organizational method and just use one. Also, I encourage people to use archival materials as much as possible. Acid-free, lignin-free, pass the PAT, use photo sleeves, use document sleeves, use archival boxes, things like that. Genealogists really have, and as archivists do too, we have sticker price shock when sometimes when we look at these archival materials to go purchase them. And I get that. I've never really understood the reasoning behind why when you're taking out acid, why you have to raise the price so high. But archival materials are a lot more expensive. For instance, if you're buying a box of sheet protectors, archival sheet protectors, they're a lot more expensive than just regular sheet protectors you can buy at Office Depot. So I encourage people that, if they can't afford the archival materials, it's okay to get the other. Now, it's not ideal. And coming from an archivist, I probably would get in trouble for that. But it's still protecting their documents. They're putting them into sleeves, they're putting them in boxes, at least they're doing that much. And so use archival materials as much as possible. I encourage genealogists to get on the mailing lists of a lot of the archival stores because they send out emails with percentages off, with sales, and at least once or twice a year, they offer free shipping on any order. And so I encourage them to do that as well. So one of the organizational methods that might be used by genealogists at home is the 3-ring binder method. This is where you take a 3-ring binder and you put archival sleeves in there and you put your records in there. To me, this is a fantastic method to start out with. This is actually the method I use for the first 10 to 15 years of my genealogy research. And so it's a great method to start out with. A lot of times in this type of method, the binders are labeled by surname on the end so that we know when we have them on the shelf, which one is which. And then within that binder, you're going to have documents arranged by document type. That's how I arranged mine. Many times some people will actually do things a little differently. But in my binders, I would have my surname on the end, and then inside I would have all the birth records behind one tab, all the death certificates behind one tab, all of the court records or marriage records, things like that, so that they were all together, but they were within the same surname. This is actually, I think, a great organizational method for beginners. When I have beginning genealogists or beginning people who are wanting to archive their family records, this is the method that I suggest that they try because it's easier. It's very easy to gather all those birth records, put them in archival sleeves, and put them in a binder. And so it's a great for beginners. This is one that I would suggest for those. One of the things that I encourage the genealogists to do is when they're storing their binders, especially if those binders are not completely full, to lay the binders flat on the shelves, because if you put those binders up on their ends, those documents within those sleeves, even though they're in sleeves, could sag. And that means that your documents are going to sag and could get creases in them, or they could get misshapen. And so I always encourage them to lay their binders flat on shelves. The next method, and this is the method that I went to from the binder method because I found that it just worked better as I got more experience with my research, and that's the folder method. This is a method where documents for an individual person is filed in individual folders, and then these folders are filed in filing cabinets or in boxes by surname. I found that as I was looking through my binders and I was researching a particular person, I find that I had to go through the whole binder to look for that particular person's records. And so I decided to take all of that person's records and put them in a folder in chronological order. And so normally when I do genealogy research, I work on one person at a time. And so when I'm ready to work on a particular person, all I have to do is pull their file from the filing cabinet that I have and just look at their records. I don't have to flip through a binder full of everybody else's records. And so if this is a method that you think will work for you, then by all means use this method. But like I said, just be consistent in whatever method you choose. The folder method, usually these folders are stored in filing cabinets or in boxes with the surname attached to them. Archivists use the folder method when organizing their vertical files collection. We as genealogists have our vertical files and they're arranged by surname or subject name, and many times they're in file folders and filing cabinets. So it's kind of looks like that. One thing that might be a downside or a con for this particular method is that you need to have room for filing cabinets or to store boxes instead of just binders on a shelf. And so you might need to think about that. If you don't have room in your home for filing cabinets or for several boxes, for like a box for each surname, you might want to consider doing the binder method. So now we're going to talk about the Home Archivist Toolkit. Now I came up with this, and there's probably more that could be added to this, but these are the basic things that I think that anyone who is doing any kind of archiving or records preservation should include in their toolkit. And some of you archivists out there, if you think of something else you think I should add to this toolkit, please email me or let me know, and I'll add it to this presentation because genealogists are always wanting to know what kind of tools they need. So first and foremost, I encourage people to actually purchase a toolbox. Now you don't need to purchase one of those great big ones that like my husband has that are on wheels, but just one, a handheld one like this that you can have with you at your workspace when you're ready to work on your family records. I actually have one of these at the archives at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives. My husband got it for me when I first started in the archives. He filled it with a bunch of tools like screwdrivers and hammers and things like that if I needed it. But have one of these by your workspace. So one of the first things we're going to put in our toolkit are soft number 2 pencils. I am asked all the time about how do I label my photographs? How do I label my documents? And so I tell people all the time, use soft number 2 pencils. And so you want to get several of those, put them in your toolkit so that you have them there when you need them. I also get the question about, well, I can't get this pencil to write on this particular photograph because it has a real slick coating on it, or they are trying to label Polaroids. And so I encourage them to get an identi pen. These can be purchased anywhere at an archival store, at Amazon even, but I tell them to use it very, very sparingly. It looks a lot like a Sharpie, which it is not, but it can be used on some of those photographs that is difficult to get pencil to show up. I would not encourage you to use this on any documents, but it's okay to use on some photographs, but it's an option if you need to use it. So we can put this in our toolkit as well. Soft bristle brushes. These are also great to have in your toolkit. Just get a collection of them. And you don't have to go to an archival store to get the great big, the expensive ones. Just go down to the dollar store and get some makeup brushes. Makeup brushes are very, very soft and they're very inexpensive. And so just get you a collection of those, get ones with big heads on them, ones that are got a finer, more slender head on them, and have those available to you in case you need them to brush off soot or dirt or something off of a document or a photograph, and have them in your toolkit. This is the archivist friend. Micro spatulas. We have tons of them, of course, in the archives. We use them for everything. When I teach this to a lot of historical and genealogical societies, they're amazed by this particular product. But again, you can purchase this at any archival store or at Amazon, and we archivists use them for literally everything. But I encourage genealogists and family historians to get some of these and to put it in their little toolbox for their toolkit. Gloves. I encourage them to get gloves. And then I explain to them the history of using gloves and not using gloves in the archives world. You know, I tell people to only, you have to use gloves whenever you're handling photographs. A lot of times we handle our documents and other items and we don't need gloves because we lose the tactile sensation in the fingertips and we can't feel or tell how we're handling something, and we could very well damage something if we're wearing gloves. And so you can always get those historically white cotton gloves, or you can actually get the nitrile gloves. Just make sure to get the powder free because the powder is not archival and you don't want that to get on your documents. And if you're allergic to latex, they also have latex free gloves. And so get you a couple pair of gloves and put that in your archivist toolkit. Certain dirt cleaning sponges. These I encourage people to get and put in their toolkit as well, because you may need to clean some documents. These are it's an amazing product. We as archivists, we know what this can do. I actually had a conversation one time with a remediation company that use these after house fires or water damage or things that happen in a particular house, because my husband was an insurance adjuster for 20 years and these can be a little expensive for what they are. And so I was trying to figure out, I'm cheap, I try to find cheap things. And so I reached out to one of these remediation companies because I thought, you know, I bet you they use these. And so I was talking to him about it, and I don't know if this is true because this is a story he told me, but he told me that the recipe for these sponges is held by one particular manufacturer, and that they guard the recipe kind of like the Coca-Cola recipe. So I was very, very intrigued when I heard that story. But I think these are miracle sponges. And so I like to use them when I clean records in the archives. And so I encourage genealogists to use them. I'm going to give some instruction here in just a minute on how to use them. And you may even be surprised when you use them on documents that you don't even think is dirty. You'll be surprised how much dirt you can lift off. Document repair tape. Now, I cautiously tell genealogists and family historians to get some of this to put in their toolkit. As far as I'm concerned, no such thing as archival tape. That's just me. Like I said, I'm kind of a purist in that way. I would much rather take a torn document, put it in an archival sleeve, and let the static electricity keep it together. But there are going to be times when people who are not trained as archivists will want to tape up a tear or something. And so I'm giving them something that they can use very sparingly that is not that destructive. And so I tell them to get some of this, either a Filmoplast or the document repair tape, and put one in their toolkit. So that's the toolkit. So if you think of anything else that should go in the toolkit, please let me know. Unfolding and flattening records. I encourage many people who have records at home to unfold and flatten their records. We do this all the time in the archives as much as possible because we know what damage can happen when a document is folded and unfolded over and over and over. To me, this is one of the first steps that an archive takes when processing a records collection. They start flattening those records. I have sit for many, many hours and years flattening and unfolding court records. And so we know what that is. We as home archivists, those genealogists, family historians, should be careful when they're unfolding and flattening their documents. If they're brittle, if they're already torn, if there's already damage, we need to be extremely careful how we handle them. And I tell genealogists all the time, if you do not feel comfortable working with your own records, then reach out to a conservator. Don't feel like you have to do it. The creases and crease lines in folded documents can eventually fail. Many of us probably already know this, but it could cause the document to tear apart and cause even more damage. That's why I like to get my documents flattened and unfolded, because you will stop that unfolding and folding all the time. And then when you're archiving the documents that are flattened, it will be less likely to sustain damage in the long run. Because if you're doing this, then as you're showing them to other family members, pulling them out for special occasions, you're still not doing that unfolding and folding and causing more damage at the crease lines. Cleaning records. I do talk to a lot of genealogists about cleaning their records. Again, I encourage them, if they don't feel comfortable, to reach out to a conservator. Many records that come to genealogists and to archivists, they come to us dirty, and they may, and these dirty records have to be dealt with. This particular photograph is one that was taken back in 2014. Our county historian, Miss Nina Finley, had passed away unexpectedly. And she was a wonderful county historian. She was one of those county historians that you could tell her a surname, and 3 hours later, she's still telling you about that family. About a month or so after she passed, I get a phone call from her son wanting to know if we would like to have all of her research records from her attic. Now, she not only knew a lot about the families in Houston County, Tennessee, because she was born and raised here, but she studied and she researched a lot of the county history. We are thankful to her for that. And so we told her, yes, we would love to have her records. And so what I didn't realize was that it would take 2 truckloads to get it out of her attic and to the archives. And this is just a photograph of part of what we received. And as you can see, this is how archives get records. And many times this is how family historians or genealogists may get their records from other family members. In any old kind of box, we found evidence of rodents, dead bugs, spiders, all kinds of great stuff that we run into. And so I encourage genealogists to always rebox their records and get them into something that is archival and stable. Soot and dust and other grime can be on our documents. I have seen all kinds of stuff that have been on documents that thankfully was able to be cleaned. Cleaning genealogical documents should be done gently. I was taught how to clean records at the Archives Institute at the TSLA by one of my favorite people, Miss Carol Roberts. She was just a mentor of mine, and someone who I learned a lot from over the years. And use the right tools. So if you have your toolbox with you that I just showed you, you have the right tools to clean your records, to remove the hazards from your records, to clean them with sponges, and to get them ready to be archived. Some of those are soft bristle brushes. I'm bringing this up again because I believe that the soft bristle brushes are one of the most important tools that we can use. Again, they're soft. They can be used on documents very lightly. They're not going to cause damage. And so these are a great thing to have in our toolkit. And I'm going to also bring up the sponges because I could not work a day in the archives without them. And I think that many genealogists who have records at home need to learn how to use this product. And so how do you use this product? You put your hand in the middle of the document because you're going to stabilize this document. If you go swiping this sponge across the document, you are going to tear it. I actually, when I have volunteers, I want to volunteer at my archives, I spend a day showing them how to clean documents. And I give them not real documents. I give them other papers that are not real. And so I teach them, and every single time they tear many of those documents before they get it right. So it's important that you know how to do this. Put your hand in the middle of the document to stabilize the document. Then using the sponge, you're going to wipe from the middle of the document out in very small little spaces and very slowly. And you're not going to bear down. You're not going to scrub. You're going to work in small areas at a time until you get the entire document cleaned. Do not use these sponges on pencil writing. So it will erase pencil writing. And so it's important that you do not use these sponges on pencil writing. You do not want to erase pencil writing on a historical or geological document. So be very careful when you have a document that's written in pencil. So let's talk about removing hazards from our documents. This is something that archivists do on a daily basis. We remove all metal from our documents as much as possible. This photograph right here will be very familiar to many archivists if you're listening to this. I do not know why, but for some reason, we as archivists like to gather and collect those things that we remove from our documents. And so this is one that we had at the archives, where we had taken out paper clips and staples and rubber bands and things, and we just threw it in a box and kept collecting it. And so I don't know why we do this. It's something weird we do, but we do. Also, we remove rubber bands from documents. That's the worst thing for me to find, is rubber bands. And so I always encourage genealogists to not use rubber bands on their genealogical and historical records at home. And so hopefully, if I talk to enough genealogists, by the time these records get to our archives, archivists will be glad that I taught them this. And remove all tape from documents. Now, this sometimes can be tricky, because a lot of times tape can be embedded in a document. I've actually seen tape where it was actually sort of kind of became the document, and they're just almost impossible to remove. Here's an example of what tape destruction can do. This is a receipt for a dry cleaning place in Houston County, Tennessee. You can see where the tape was located. It left a very brown residue that cannot be cleaned with the sponge. Luckily, the piece of tape was very brittle, and the adhesive had worn away to where when I touched it, it just fell off. So that's fantastic, but it still left damage. Good thing I can still read what's underneath there. What kind of things do we remove? Well, all kinds of things. We remove staples, paper clips, straight pins. A lot of people used straight pins back in the day. Grommets, hairpins, binding clips, any and all metal fasteners. There's a photo there on the right showing you all kinds of different metal fasteners that we have encountered in an archive setting, and there's still different ones and more out there. And so anything that's metal, you don't want on your documents, because they could rust, and rust is actually very, very damaging. You don't want to use any of these on your records. These are some more modern things. And so we don't want to use any of these either on any of our records, because they bind. Even if they're made of stainless steel, people say, well, it's stainless steel, it won't rust. Well, I actually have seen some stainless steel that actually rusted in the right circumstances. And so we don't want to use any of these kinds of metals on our documents. This is what metal paper clips can do to a document. Not only will it rust the document, but then once that rust starts, it actually starts eating at the document. And luckily, this isn't really on the writing part, but if you have this on a part of a document that is extremely important, like a date of birth, a date of death, a date of marriage, something that you need for your research, and the rust has eaten it away, you just don't want that. So we just don't need to use metal on our records. And here's where we use that micro spatula. I'm asked all the time, how do I remove these things off of my documents? And so this is how we remove our staples in the archives. You can see that rusty staple. I don't even like looking at it. We use our micro spatula, and we lift up the legs of the staple, then turn that paper back around and put the micro spatula underneath the head of the staple and pull it out, hopefully very slowly. But so our micro spatula that we have in our toolkit is a great use for getting rid of some of these metal things that are in our documents. We do not want to use these to remove staples. I was aware of the cloth staple remover for forever, and so I knew that, but I had never seen one of these wand staple removers until I started working at the courthouse as an archivist. And one of the offices I was in, they were using one of these to rip out these staples out of documents, and it was amazing the kind of damage one of those can do. And so we don't want to use these to remove our staples. We want to use our micro spatula and take our time and remove them so it does not damage our records. Also, we want to remove things that bind. We want to remove all metal, but we want to remove things that bind. And things like rubber bands, twine, rope, shoestrings. I've seen shoestrings, hair ribbons, maybe hair ribbons around that stack of love letters that you have in your family. Don't get rid of the hair ribbon. I'll talk about that in a minute. And Band-Aids. Yes, Band-Aids. I've actually seen in my archives where they must have run out of just literally anything to bind some documents together, and they pulled out the Band-Aids and used those. So I've seen it all, even Band-Aids. These items can bind documents together and can damage your documents. Not only can it damage in that they can stick to those documents, they're going to try to get it off, but the actual binding part can break down the fibers in the documents even more than what it's already breaking down in a natural process, and really can cause a lot of damage. Rubber bands can actually deteriorate to the point of actually sticking to the documents. I don't know what happens to the chemicals in a rubber band over time, but they actually kind of melt or turn gooey, and they stick to these documents, and boy, do they stick to the documents, and you just don't want that to happen. Here's an example of that. This is some documents that had rubber bands on them, and those rubber bands deteriorated to the point that they became kind of brittle, but yet they stuck very well to these documents. And I used a micro spatula to chip away at the rubber band to try to get it off. And you can still see that it left residue and a stain on there from being there. Twine, rope, shoestrings can damage documents if they're not removed. Again, the actual binding process can actually damage the fibers of the document, so we don't want that. And those hair ribbons, if you have a stack of love letters from your grandmother or grandfather, remove the hair ribbon and then, and archive those letters, but keep the hair ribbon as a family heirloom or a keepsake. And so it was put there with love or with affection. And so keep that hair ribbon as an archival keepsake. Removing tape. Removing tape can be extremely difficult. This is actually a newspaper clipping where I found tape on there, and the tape, I'm not kidding you, this tape, it was like it became the newspaper print. There was no way of getting it off, so I just put it in an archival sleeve and I left it like it was. If the tape has become hard and brittle, which really that's what you want, it should just come right off. If the adhesive has deteriorated to the point where it has released itself from the document, that's the best case scenario. But I have seen tape actually deteriorate and that the adhesive gets so gummy that it just sticks to that paper and it's just almost impossible to get it off. If the tape is attaching documents together, again, another use of like a paper clip, but they didn't have paper clips. Just clip that tape in the middle, and if you can get the tape off, great, and if not, I would just leave it. So what I've told you what not to use. So what is safe to use? Well, what is safe to use is safe to use only sparingly. My advice is not to use anything to bind anything together or connect documents together. But there are occasions where you might be concerned that a series of documents, like a letter, a 2 or 3 page letter, or something that you might get separated from each other and you don't want that to happen. We can use some things. So sparingly, I would encourage you to use plastic paper clips or plastic coated paper clips. Now I have people that say, well, what about stainless steel paper clips? They're not supposed to rust. Again, I have seen stainless steel rust. And so if you're going to use paper clip, if you see a need to use paper clips or something to keep those papers together, use plastic paper clips or the plastic coated paper clips. Again, with the archival tape, as far as in my mind, there's no such thing as archival tape, but I get questions all the time about, I have rips, I have tears, I need to do something. And so there is Filmoplast archival tape, repair tape that can be used on small tears, small rips, but used very, very sparingly. Again, I would much rather take a torn document and put it in an archival sleeve and let the static electricity of that sleeve keep that document together. Again, should be used sparingly. And put the tape, if you're going to use it, put the tape on the back of the document or where there's no writing. There may be writing on both sides of that document. And so just be extremely careful where you use it. For severely damaged documents, and if you don't feel comfortable working with it, please contact a conservator. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how to find a conservator. Here's an example of kind of what it looks like. You can actually still see through this archival tape, which is great. But again, just use it sparingly and only whenever you have to. This is actually an experiment that I did. This is a document that we had in the archives that when I opened it or when I took it out of its packet, it literally fell to the floor in pieces like this. And this is from the folding and unfolding, years and years of it. This must have been a very popular document. And this is for Bethlehem Church here in Houston County. And so I thought to myself, well, I wonder what this archival tape will do. And so I actually put this document back together using archival tape. This is what I use, the document repair tape. And this is how it looks. Now, there are a few little tiny pieces missing because they were missing in the first place, but it actually went back together pretty good. You could read everything on the document. Like I said, I would not encourage this on every single document if you have a lot of damaged documents, but using it occasionally, you can see that it actually isn't too bad. So record storage, one of the things that I encourage genealogists and talk to them about is the fact that it doesn't matter really what you do with your records. How you store them is really the most important part. And so we need to store our records not in an attic, not in a basement, not in a garage, because you can't control the environment there. Now, like I've said, we don't live in an archive in our homes, but we can do the best that we can. We need to store our records in a dry environment off the floor. And so very important. We need to store our records in an area where the temperatures are consistent and do not fluctuate. Many times people get hung up on the temperature in a place or humidity in the place. And yes, it's important. But to me, what's really important is if those temperatures or humidity levels are fluctuating, because that can actually cause more damage and hurt your documents. And keep all of our records out of direct sunlight. I don't know how many genealogists I've talked to that have their photographs and documents framed and on their walls. And they come to me and they say, what has happened to this photograph? The image is just about gone. What's happened to it? And I've asked them, was it in direct sunlight? And then we'll say, yeah. And I'll say, that's what's happened. Sunlight is one of the most destructive things to documents and photographs. I encourage people to take really good photocopies of their photos and their documents if they want to display them, and put the originals away and use those copies, because today we can make such great copies. They look just like the originals. Another thing too, and I got this from my husband, who is an insurance adjuster. When, God forbid, your house catches on fire, you don't want to be trying to grab those things off the walls, off the tables to get out of the house. One of the first things that he has found, that when he goes to a home where it's burned, the people are standing in their yard and they're saying, oh, my photographs, they're gone. And so using copies to display is my advice. Climate controls. Should not be hard. A lot of people make this more difficult than what it is. Temperatures where you store your documents should be a steady, either between 35 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. The cooler, the better. Now, none of us live in a house at 35 degrees. I get that. But we should find a temperature that is cooler than 65 degrees and keep it steadily at that temperature. Use a thermometer if you want to. I tell genealogists, why you go into a library or an archives and it's so cold you have to have a sweater. This is why, because we're trying to slow down the deterioration of the paper, because it's already deteriorating on its own without other things making it deteriorate. And so keeping those temperatures down helps to slow that deterioration. Humidity levels. Living in Tennessee, we have to deal with this. Humidity levels should be between 30 and 50%. Choose a level and keep it there consistently. That's why archives have dehumidifiers. I have them in my archives. We check our humidity levels on a daily basis to make sure that we are keeping it at a constant. I keep mine at a constant 35 degrees in my archives. And so I encourage genealogists to keep their temperatures and their humidity levels at a constant level. And so these constant levels will help slow the document deterioration. I also, I tell people to consider purchasing a temperature and humidity monitor, put it in the storage area. They're very inexpensive to help you keep track. So if, in case something's happened, that those levels have changed. You don't want to see this. This is mold growing in a damp area. Now, this is an extreme example of it, but if you see this on a wall near your records, most likely this has gotten onto your records. And so you don't want to see this. And so keeping those temperatures and humidity levels at a consistent level is a good thing. Let's see, I'm going the wrong way. Consulting with the conservator. There's no reason why you should do anything with records that you're not comfortable doing, because there are conservators out there to help you. When you don't feel comfortable repairing your own documents, talk to a conservator. And we as archivists do this. And so, we don't know everything about conserving our records either. I've reached out to conservators many times about particular historical documents or important documents that we have in the archives that I did not feel comfortable working with. When documents, photographs, and artifacts have extensive damage, I would consult a conservator. If documents are extremely historical or one of a kind, definitely reach out to a conservator. And also reach out to an archivist to see, if they would like to see the document, because many of these one of a kind or extremely historical ones that are uncovered in family records are exciting for us. I tell people to contact the state archives to look for a conservator. Like I said, Carol Roberts used to be the conservator at TSLA. Now we have Emily. And so, not necessarily that they'll do the work for you, but they may give you a name and a phone number or a contact of someone who can. But if you can consult with them, talk to them about what your problem is, they might give you a little bit of advice and help you. Another place to go is the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. I can go to their website. They actually have people who are listed by area, by place, by city, by state that you can contact if you don't live in Tennessee or wherever state you live, and you can find someone that can be of help to you, because there are people that work in archives that are conservators, but there also are private people that have private businesses that do this for a living, and so they are all listed on this particular website. So my parting advice to you is to not do anything to your records that you can't undo. This is one of my mottos. That's why I say less is more. I don't want anybody to do anything to their records that you can't undo. And thank you for attending this presentation. You can visit, I have a blog, it's called A Genealogist in the Archives, and also find me on Facebook. In the genealogy world, I'm known as the Archive Lady, and so find me on Facebook. And if you have any questions or anything, please email me. There's my email, melissabarker20@hotmail.com. And I think I met the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Yes, you did, right on time. Thank you so much, Melissa. This was excellent. I always enjoy myself a nice refresher of the basics of archives. And for those of you who aren't archivists, I hope that you learned a lot. Do we have any questions? We have a couple of minutes. We can take a few questions. If you think of something later or we don't have time to answer your question, there is Melissa's email right there where you can reach her.
Please go back to the previous slide with her Facebook info. Thank you.
Yeah, if you just go to Facebook, you can just search for the Archive Lady. I've got my own page. So
this was really helpful. Thank you. Stacy Smith from Lamorne College in Memphis, Tennessee. We have a new staff person working in our archives. So the toolkit that you gave, although it was for home, I think it would also help in an academic setting as well, in addition to some archive sleeves and other things. But definitely a good start with picking up the project of trying to organize that area. So thank you very much.
Stacy, thank you for that. And if you'll email me, I actually have a handout for this presentation, but I have an extra handout that includes all the pieces and parts to that toolkit.
Okay, great. I will.
I'll be glad to send it to you.
Thank you.
Let's see, Melissa, we have a question in the chat from Kenneth Jennings. How do you share or let others know what archives you have?
Oh, I'm glad he asked that question, especially for October this month. One of the things that I started early on, and to be honest with you, I didn't know that it would be so popular, was I started posting on social media every single day, a thing called a Today in the Archives post. And what I would do, and I still do it today, I've been doing it since 2011. And what I do is I post a document, a photograph, a photo of an artifact or something in our archives. I tell what I know about it. And I encourage people to comment if they know anything about it, like if it's a photograph where it's an unidentified people or identified places. And then I also, at the end of every one of those posts, I encourage people to, if they have anything to donate, to get in touch with us. And so I've been doing this since 2011. And so it's something that I find that I can get the records out there to show what we have. And so this also encourages records donation for those of you that accept records at your archives. When people see this, especially in the local community, I get people that walk in, they'll say, I saw your post. Well, I have this. Do you want this? And so it really works well for that. And so, yeah, and then I share what they donate. And so it's been a tremendous, wonderful thing for us at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives to get out there what we have in our archives.
How do you interact with the local historical societies or the groups like that?
The only other group that we have locally is a historical society. I'm actually on the board of directors of our historical society. We don't have any other place in Houston County that is collecting historical or genealogical records. I'm it. And so I know as a county archive, there are other county archives, especially in Tennessee, that don't collect those kinds of records. They just do government records. Our main job is to take care of the government records, but I decided to accept these other records because there was no place else. My relationship with my historical society is very, very good. In fact, on Friday, we just got a large donation from a local family that their parents had passed away, and they were huge in the historical community. And they donated to the Historical Society, but the Historical Society brought it to the archives. And so I'm very, very fortunate that I have a very good relationship.
Let's see, catching up in the chat. Melissa in South New Jersey wants to know if you have any suggestions for people living in very humid areas.
Well, dehumidifiers. Tennessee, as we all know, can get extremely humid. And so what you need to really do, though, is you need to look at your square footage in your room, in your building, wherever your records are located, whatever storage area. And you need to get a dehumidifier that will work for that square footage. If you have too small of a dehumidifier, it's not going to do a very good job. And so I empty my dehumidifiers in the summertime when it is extremely humid here in Tennessee, and our humidity gets to 60–70%. I'm emptying those about every other day. And so it's important that I would say use dehumidifiers.
Let's see. From Lynn, there's a very specific question about photograph storage. She has photos of all sizes from 1900. How do I put them in an album and sleeves if pages have different sizes? I want to keep the photos in the same order to try to identify them.
One of the things I encourage people to do is to go to these online archival stores. I could drop some names of some of them, like Gaylord and Light Impressions and Hollinger Metal Edge. There's several out there. And I encourage people to actually request the printed catalog. Now, their catalog of all their materials is actually on their website. I find it more difficult to find what I'm looking for. So I ask for a printed catalog. It's kind of like getting the Christmas Sears and Roebuck wish list book. I sit down with it, but I can easily see the materials. And then they have the listing of sizes, like for photo albums and the sheets that go into these albums. There's all different sizes, and they handle different sizes of photographs. And for me, it's much easier to see these in their paper catalog. Now, you may be very good and adept to using their online resources, but I can tell you that there are all kinds of sizes for photograph sleeves and photo albums. And so I think you'll be able to find what you're looking for.
A follow-up to that from Shelia, hopefully I said that correctly, sorry. Do you typically remove photographs from adhesive albums?
If we can. Those 1960s and 70s they're called magnetic photo albums. If at all possible, as archivists, I believe that we do. Now, some that are made were the adhesive extremely sticky, and it's difficult to get the photos out. You don't want to damage your photos, and so you could try using dental floss between the photo and the page and try to lift it off that way, but don't press down, don't use a lot of strength, because you don't want to damage your photographs. If you just cannot seem to get them out of the book, then I would leave them just as they are and archive them just that way.
All right, I think I got all the questions. If there are any more, once again, you can email Melissa Barker. Can you put your email in the chat real quick, Melissa?
In the chat, sure.
And also there it is on the screen.
Yep.
There are some more specific questions coming in, but if you could please email Melissa for those specific questions, she will happily answer them with her expertise. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us today. And once again, our next lunch talk is next Tuesday, 12 p.m. Central once again, and that'll be part 1 of LGBTQ archives in Tennessee. Thank you all. Bye-bye.